Hello, welcome back to the JRB podcast with myself, Ryan Levine, joined here with Jeff Jones and Bowden Temnick.
Hello.
Hey,
So, it has been some time. There've been all of the WCQs, as well as a bunch of national championships, and now the next step is the World Championship. So we're going to be talking about the results from the WCQs, the format going into Worlds, some information about Master Duel Worlds, and then maybe we'll talk about. They just announced a bunch of stuff for Dueling Nexus, so maybe we'll touch on that.
Depending on how long this goes,
Yeah.
yeah.
So first thing is first. The NWCQ. Jeff and I did not do very well.
Yeah.
Um,
I went 8-3. I did not expect to do well. I did not been practicing for this event at all. I just played Kashtira.
yeah.
It was whatever, it's fine.
I played Vanquish Soul. I had the round one feature match where you can watch me lose that.
Mhm.
And then uh, the loss that eliminated me from the tournament is actually just insane. So my Vanquish Soul Fire Dark Earth attribute diversity deck. The last opponent that defeated me was playing the I don't even know what you call this. A fish shark
the
stealth
Oh, the Umi deck.
kraken.
The Umi deck,
The
right?
stealth kraken, yes, with goes
yeah.
in match. and I looked at it and I just went, huh. Yeah. Like his board his board was Bahamut Toad, Stealth Kraken, goes in match, and I just look at all the cards in the field and I just go, all right, I guess. So that was funny. Like, I mean, when I lost, I was like, oh man, I feel like Vanquish Soul's a deck that usually beats like the weird decks. And then I thought about the interactions more, and I was like, I don't think I was ever beating this deck. Actually, I
Mhm.
think this one was probably never losing to Vanquish Soul. But
Yeah.
anyways, it was very funny that I like when I thought about it more, I was like, all right, I feel like this is it really felt like because I've talked about it in the past where I've even said like sometimes it's not even like oh like I drew badly and like that's the variance of my tournament. Sometimes it is literally like I queued into the most obscure unwinnable matchup ever and that was the variance of my tournament. But I do not think my deck was the best deck in the room by any means. But I do think I had a hilariously poor performance based on just the decks I played against. Like it was very funny. Blake played the exact same deck card for card, and he ended up missing out on breakers. He got 68th after he was X2-1, which is not a record that you should ever feel particularly confident in, but some did top, I believe. So if it just swung the other way a little bit, then he was making it. So
Yeah.
unfortunate, but you can't really look at your X2-1 record and feel like it's a bad beat that you didn't top, but it is what it is. So I did like my deck a lot actually. Like I had a lot of fun playing it. I don't think it was that bad really. It just as I mentioned, it was hilariously bad matchups that I played into that I think is like very amusing. But anyways, we've mentioned previously what we thought, like the good decks were, and I know that we've all spent a lot of time saying that we did not think Kashtira was very good, and then you ended up even playing it, and I know you
Mhm.
had kind of an assessment of it is just the other decks were just worse, right? Like it's not even
Yeah.
I still don't even think Kashtira is particularly strong right now. I truly just think every deck is terrible. But
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it comes down to a lot of it where like I don't think Kashtira is overly like the craziest deck ever. I just think every other deck has like inherent flaws that make it worse. It's like Kashtira's like the least flawed deck basically,
sure.
and where every other deck like has so Kashtira's like issue when it loses is when it, like, doesn't draw Kashtira monsters most of the time. If you don't draw Kashtira monster, you just lose. Whereas a lot of the other decks need to draw extremely balanced hands of, like, both engine and non-engine to win.
Yeah, where Kashtira, I also feel like if your hand is literally 5 Kashtira monsters, I feel like you still might lose. But yeah, I feel like
Mhm.
Kashtira a lot of the time can get there drawing 1 Kashtira monster and 4
And
non-engine, or even 4, even like a lance and 4 Kashtira monsters,
or
and
like a
like
Book
you
of
like
Moon,
just
like
yeah.
like, yeah, Kashtira and a Book of
Mm.
Moon, like, sometimes that's just enough to beat the mirror, right?
When the other decks, it looks like yeah, you need like it's like okay, you need 2 engine pieces, 3 non-engine pieces. It has to be a Tuesday evening, after the winter
Mhm.
solstice, and your taxes have to be done, and then maybe you'll win game one. Like that's how it feels like for some of these decks. Um, sometimes where yeah, I agree. It's just like a lot of the time, and this is kind of what drew me to Kashtira last format. What I liked about it so much is just that, which there as we talked about it, it is flawed, so it's not quite the same, but there are fewer moving parts I feel in a Kashtira deck than the other decks, where like summon Fenrir, your opponent looks at it and goes, and like it will do something, right? Like it will almost all of your engine cards will have an impact on the board. The exceptions are when you just have like Theosis and Birth and no monsters, but that's whatever that'll happen. But yeah, so I was thinking a little bit about like where does the format go from here? Like I doubt, almost guaranteed we will not get a TCG list before the World Championships, because I feel like they
Mhm.
probably want to like lock in what the World's format is going to be, considering it is only a month away. So historically, in the last 7, 8, 10 years, in the last 10 years, right, the World's format has
Mhm.
always just been a joint ban list. So what whatever card is whatever the fewest legal copies of a card are in either region is what will happen for the world's list. So like for example, like Diablosis is forbidden in the TCG and a Rise Heart is forbidden in the TCG, but Planet is at 1 in the OCG and Fenrir is forbidden in the OCG. So in the world's list, all of that is true. Diablosis is forbidden, a Rise Heart is limited, Fenrir is forbidden, and Planet is limited. Right? So that is generally how it goes. I doubt there'll be any except I don't think there's even been a single exception to that in the last
Yeah.
10 years. So that is what I imagine will be, and I imagine, as I said, they want to get that kind of locked in. So, um, but after the World Championship, leading into the next season, which we have Cancun and Vancouver and Brazil, whatever. I believe all those events are after Duelist Nexus.
Well, Duelist Nexus is before, like, the week before Worlds, so
Oh
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Which
Yeah.
Yeah,
presumably will not be legal for Worlds because
Right.
those sets have never been
no,
legal.
they're definitely not legal.
Yeah. Because yeah, that the set that comes out the week or the week before Worlds is not legal usually.
Mhm.
But yeah. So, um, what do you think? What do you think has to be done? Do you think we can have a list where they like do you think there's a world they look at this format and they just go, okay, let's try this again, but hit Kashtira more, right? Where they just go like, okay, maybe if we just hit Kashtira and leave all the other decks relatively untouched, maybe it's fine, but I
So
don't
I
know.
think they would probably so if you look at the last Forbidden list, they
Mm-hmm.
touched Kashtira and then looked like they did the philosophy of if we touch Kashtira, what other decks could be good, and should we hit those two? And then tried to do that also.
Yeah, but then they hit the decks that weren't
But
Kashtira more than Kashtira,
right,
which
yeah. So
was
then they
funny.
went to like
Yeah.
Pearly and stuff like that, and like they hit like Naturia cards, like instead of the cards like that
Yeah.
actually mattered. So I think they will just go that approach again, where they will go and hit Kashtira and then see the other decks that have been performing very well, like Labyrinth and Runic varieties, and start cracking down on those a little bit. I don't think if the NAWCQ did not end the way it did, I would not think Eradicator would be hit. But now I would be feel very positive in thinking that Eradicator will be hit now.
because it happened twice, right?
It
Well,
happened,
like it
and
happened
now
very, yeah,
it happened in the finals of 2 major events,
yeah,
and it happened on stream at least 3 times.
yeah.
Um, so and it's not just it's not just the Labyrinth deck doing it, as we've seen, and it actually, 2 people I lost to 2 Runic decks who just hard drew Eradicator and Eradicated me,
The
and that was
gigantic as
yep,
their,
the
yeah,
gigantic, yep. They just hard drew it and eradicated me. I was like, oh, okay, all right.
yeah. I the only deck other than Kashtira that I think I really want to see hit is just like, God, I'm so bored of playing against Sprite cards. Like they've
Right.
just been in the format for a year now, right? Power of the Elements was the August set last year, and I'm just tired of this dude, man. I'm tired of this Sprite Blue fella. You know, I just want people to play different cards, like because
I
that's,
am I
yeah.
am okay with the Sprite cards.
I'm
I've been
just
quiet,
bored of them.
but I'm just waking up. Let me
Uh-huh.
gather my thoughts. For I
Mhm.
also played a WCQ, but I played Stovey Torby strategy. And my losses with my stove deck were a Rika deck, a Terelement deck, and then on the bubble I got a game loss for getting to side out. And yeah. But in my experience, I agree. I think Eradicator should not exist in the game, and we've been Crush Card Virus before, obviously to a different extent, but I think they tend to be the same thing where if you're able to activate it into a format where decks are primarily spells, people wanted to play like thrust and tactics and everything else, and that's before you get into like the runic decks. I don't think cards like Eradicator are particularly healthy. But then when you don't hit Eradicator and you don't hit like cards like, so when you do hit Eradicator and you do hit cards like Anti Spell, maybe cards like Thrust and Tactics and like the Runic decks get like particularly powerful. Obviously, Thrust and Tactics is a little different because they depend on what decks are good in the format. Sometimes you draw those cards and your hand is now 4 cards instead of 5 cards because they're not activatable, which is like a trend we saw over the weekend. I think like people just trying to make their deck the least weak to cards like Thrust and Tactics, whether it be with Eradicator, Anti-Spell, or just not activating monster effects at all. Like not making a Rise Heart, just ending on like Fenrir.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely won a good amount of my matches just by with anti-spell Baron. Like,
Mm. Yeah, pretty much, right? Like those are the card,
yeah.
yeah, like especially when a lot of these decks just like don't end on negates. Maybe that's why like you saw Dragon like pick up in popularity as well. It's because like, well, if Dragon gets to play when everyone's playing like thrust tactics, and then obviously like Dark Ruler sort of comes into the fray time from time. But it's like, well, Dragon can do a little bit more than Sprite. It's like a little more fluid, and like its end board is more resilient if people do decide to do hand traps. Whereas like Runic Sprite, if everyone's playing, let's say like the Christian Thomas like hand trap Kashtira deck, you throw a bunch of hand traps at them. The Sprite deck has nothing. Like you might actually just like Asher Hugin, and like they summon 1 card, you hand trap another thing, they end that turn with like 2 cards. Like that's what's meant to happen. But against like Dragon, you hand trap them twice. Like they still have like 2 points of interaction. You now start your turn with 4 cards in hand. Like it's pretty good. But yeah, I think if we do hit anti spell, we do hit Eradicator. Probably have to see stuff like Runic Tip. Probably getting like a consistency hit. I don't think you can do anything else to the Runic deck without just making it completely unplayable. And I think it's like pretty decent as like an engine. But I think like most decks, which is like kind of funny, like Sky Striker, where a lot of the time, like I think their cards are really good and like they should probably be hit anyway, but because of how like end of match procedure works and just like time rules for the physical game are, those sort of decks become like way more polarizing. And so you sort of have these other looming issues of like, well, here's the runic deck. Like, what's the runic deck's win con? It's like these cards are so good you have to skip your battle phase. Okay, so most of these games will end in time on the
I definitely
surface
lost
because
twice
yeah,
in time to
mm,
Wiz and other life gainer burn
yeah,
cards, because of that. Yeah.
pretty much, right? It's like those decks don't have a real like win condition enough of the time where it's like I think it's funny though, like Sky Strike it did have a win condition because like it could be the aggressor if your opponent played incorrectly, but like the Runic deck struggles to be the aggressor because it's like most of the games that it's winning are games that it's resolving Runic cards so often, and then it tries to find like the alt win con with deck out, but sometimes it's like, yeah, I'm resolving Runic cards, but I'm doing it to sort of just like stem the bleeding of like my deck's not doing that much, but I'm getting turns, and it's like sometimes you can sort of get there, but I don't know.
It's
This is
also like
weird.
sometimes people against Runic just don't concede because
Mhm.
they've like convinced themselves like he doesn't have a battle phase. I can still win, and it's like they'll have like 9 cards, you'll have 3, and they just like
Right.
I think that is a thing you can sort of see though. Like some game states you look at and it's like, well, unless my opponent draws exactly tip off this fountain drawing 3, I think I should be okay. Like it's like
And
very
that was me
specific
in my
cards.
first matchup where I lost in time, where it was
Mhm.
literally that. I was like, as long as he doesn't resolve another tip, I think I can win. And so
Yeah.
like, and I was like, so I wasted 3 turns. Like, if I just draw any card, I'm good. And the 3 turns I didn't draw a card, then he drew a tip, and then I wasted 10 minutes. Right.
Hmm. That's like I think that's the biggest problem is like when the runic cards put the recycled ones to the bottom of the deck. I think the fact that you're able to just like I was like, oh, you activated a once per turn card. You put it to the bottom in like their turn, and then on your turn it's like, oh well, I drew it in my 4 drawers. Like that's where it becomes kind of dicey, and maybe that's when you have to look at like the master duel level of like we should hit the individual runic cards, and then that means when they get put to the bottom, they're not drawing them again. Like that has to be something to consider when you look at TCG, which is like another cool thing. I think they sort of like kind of realized, but not really. Maybe with like tier is when they started putting all of them to like one, and it's like, yeah, if you put these to one and they go to the bottom, like initially, obviously you can shuffle your deck at some points and like maybe see them, but you're not gonna see like the copy of Sheeran again. Like jet, like just hard drawn like copy of Sheeran, like that's at the bottom. Or like any of those sort of like funny ish decks, where it's like, yeah, you put the card on the bottom, like the Pearly deck, right? That's my friend puts them to the bottom, or is it just normal Pearly? I can't remember. Just stuff like
Uh,
that where it's like if you start doing consistency hits and you see those cards like once or twice or like in engine, it's like put it to the bottom of your deck, like prosperity, right?
yeah,
It's like
well,
you look at your 5 cards, it's like you see
mhm.
two one-offs, you have to put it to the bottom, you're probably not seeing the other one, for a good chunk of time. So I think that's maybe what we want to see a little bit more of now with how like archetypes of design, but I could be reaching. Could just be like maybe it's just too much in engine searching and everything else, but probably doesn't make a difference. But I think tip
So
is probably the biggest argument.
yeah, yeah. I think like I'm always kind of in favor of like the path of least resistance and limiting or banning like one card over like limiting
Mm.
multiple. Um, but um, I
I just think
think
the hits they did, like Fountain to 2 was like
and
hilariously
Japan did
useless.
the same thing. They also put Fountain to 2.
Now it's at 1. But yes, it was at 2
Mm.
as well, which
Is
is also
oh, is
funny.
it?
Yeah, it is now at 1. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But it was at 2. I remember that happening.
What do you think their logic was for Fountain to two?
I,
Like,
I don't
was it just
know.
like we have to hit a runic card? Let's just put Fountain to two, right? Like maybe do you think that was like a criteria or something where it's like,
I don't
I
even
don't know.
want to think about that because of how
yeah,
inconsequential it is. It's just
yeah.
gonna make me
No,
mad. So,
that's what I mean. Like I'm sitting there and I'm just like, why is this happening?
Yeah. Um.
um,
Yeah, but so I guess to go back to what I was saying about the sprite stuff, I actually think I've completely come around on your view where I think actually it's Nimble Beaver that I want to go. Because I actually don't think I have a problem with the sprite cards at
Mm.
this point. I think the problem I have with it now is just like just a level 2 monster plus anything becomes whatever
Yeah,
they, you know what I mean, and it
that
reminds
yeah.
me
I
of like the
I
orca
don't think the
stuff.
sprite cards are even like doing anything crazy. It's just like when you interact with them, I feel like there's so many extra layers to it depending on how they build their deck. So it's like, well, you're gonna make your end board regardless. Like, there's always gonna be a Sprite carrot on the field. I guess my deck can't contain X, Y, and Z cards
Yeah,
in a meta
yeah.
practice, but
And
I
it's
don't
and
know,
it's like, I personally didn't have, like, I got like Iblee, but like because my deck has no extra deck, I just played Lingerie, but like that didn't matter. But
man.
Oh
like
my god, can
I'm
I talk about that
yeah,
something real quick
sure,
before I
yeah.
forget? So, in one of my matches, I had to play against this was like it might have been the last round of Swiss,
Okay.
honestly, of day 1. And I
Mhm.
had to play against there was a guy playing oh my god, now that I'm, like, thinking about it, I can't remember what the deck is called. The ritual the Deer Servant deck? What are those
Dogmatica?
like, pure Dogmatica, right?
Mhm.
Sure.
I think he got a feature match, and, he won the die roll against me and ended up summoning, like, all the Dogmatica ritual monsters, searching Saravius, and then summoning Archlord Christia, and giving me an Iblee. And I was like, "Oh my god." Like, I drew, like, Book of Moon to, like, out either, like, Iblee or Christia, but he searched Saravius. I was like, "Holy crap, this is ridiculous." And at one point, game 3, he again, Iblees me, but I have Ash Blossom for Nadir Servant, so his field is not that good. But I get the game down to a point where he also like goes and matches me. It's an entire thing, and I get to the game point where I'm like getting rid of his stuff with Fenrir, and he sets a monster. And at one point, he dimensional barriers me for Xyz, and he has a face down monster. And I'm like, I don't know what that is, but I can make Donner pop the face down, then summon a unicorn, search for birth back, and then like stabilize from there. So I turned my 2 guys into Donner, pop the face down, and it was another Iblee. And I didn't realize that when Iblee goes to the grave in any way from field, it goes to my field. So
Mhm.
I Donnered the Iblee, and then I got an Iblee on my field for a second time in the match. And I was like, oh my god, I'm about to lose. But luckily, I was able to come out of it. But it was crazy. So
But
that's my Iblee story.
right, I guess what I mean about Iblee is that just like similarly to how Nightmare Unicorn, to how Nightmare Mermaid summoning Iblee was unacceptable. I think Gigantic Sprite summoning Iblee is unacceptable, right? Like that, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So again,
I mean, at that point, can we just not have Iblee?
no,
I
Yeah.
would be okay
Yeah.
with
yes,
that.
that right. I mean, yeah,
Mhm.
that would be one of my
Just
other points.
get rid of it
But
forever,
yeah,
please.
I would not. I
It will not. It
obviously
will.
wouldn't.
It will not. It will not get hit 100%.
Oh,
But
it
it
definitely
is
Oh,
a
won't.
card
I
that we
agree.
all
I
think should
agree. It
be
won't.
banned.
Yeah, it will not get banned. It will not get hit. I agree completely. but, um, but yeah, I, I definitely. I mean, like, I feel like they might just do what Japan did, which is just they limited blue and jet and starter. But if you look at what the Runic for Hire decks are playing right now, they're playing one jet and one starter on purpose. So I'm not even convinced that those hits would even, and they're not playing Beaver or whatever I was talking about. So
Hmm.
I'm not sure what those hits would even have to be. That would probably be like you have to hit the Runic side of that deck, right? Not the Sprite
I mean,
side.
my biggest
Mhm.
problem with that, like, I never lose to the sprite cards. If my opponent
Sure.
draws all sprite cards, I'm like, sweet, your deck does nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
It's always the runic cards that are the problem, and that's why I am of the opinion also where I don't have the biggest problem with the sprite cards. But I can see wanting to hit them simply because they've been like kind of like a staple archetype or engine for like the last
For
year.
literally a year, and
Yeah,
I just want new stuff, man.
yeah.
I just want my opponent to play new cards against me, not right
Right.
into
Duh.
Aramesia and
Not
Sprite
only
Blue.
that, but it's like I would also like to use new cards
Yeah.
and not have to worry about these cards I've been seeing for a year and
Mhm.
feeling bad. Like, why would I use these new cards when these old cards are just simply better?
Yeah, I still do feel like Sprite Blue specifically is better than 99% of cards that get printed, but the other
Mm.
ones are not as good. But it's like that's the one is just like my opponent plays some level 2 monster that does nothing and they go summon blue and I look at my Ash and go like I look at my one
Mhm.
hand trap and just go like, well, yeah. Yeah, there we are. But um
So, since we talked about Sprite, which is like a very popular thing right now, I think the next one I'll talk about is the Labyrinth deck, which
Sure.
has seen a lot of play. And I think the way to go about Labyrinth is not. I don't think the Labyrinth cards themselves are the problem. I am of the opinion, and I think you guys will probably agree, that the biggest issue with that are the cards like Ghost and Skill Drain Eradicator. And I
I
think that if
think
you hit
I think
those cards, the deck
less
is.
the floodgates themselves. I think Eradicator is the sillier one, where it's like half of the time when I build like a lab deck or I look at it, it's like you can play Trap Lab, and then you don't really have too much of a win con. But in some pockets of the format, your deck is the best deck because no one respects like setting trap cards, right? And like when the format is like that, I think the format is like too broad. So sort of like what we had now, where it's a little more evident, and you like look at floodgates, like, oh damn, Gozen's just terrible for the game. It's like, yeah, it probably shouldn't exist, but I think when it's like a little more known, that deck probably falls out of favor, enough of the time, or like those cards fall out of favor, and maybe you see like the lab archetype play the hand traps again, like minimal floodgates and just a bunch of the utility traps to set off lady. So I'm of the opinion that Drain is a manageable card. Gozen maybe not as much. But...
Well, I think it's. I mean, I don't know how much. I Skill Drain is just a card to me that like
Mm.
is going to, when it's a problem in a format, I feel like it's just going to be a problem.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's also funny that like we have this card at 3, Japan has Max C at 3, but has Skill Drain at 1. They think that like Skill Drain is like better than Max E basically.
Which is funny because
Yeah.
for literally 8 years, we had it at 1 and they had it at 3.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, great, I guess.
We traded.
I
Yeah.
do
That's
I do agree that goes in like stuff like rivalry are more problematic than skill drain. Because like
I
skill
think
drain, you
I
can
think
still
they're
put monsters on the field and
yeah.
like try to push past, like if I draw monsters, my opponent doesn't draw monsters, I can still summon them
Well,
and kill you.
it's
Gozen
also
doesn't
the
allow
fact
that.
that you can use so like when cards like Book of Moon exist, right? Or you're playing stuff like well, obviously like Cosmic is kind of redundant because like it beats the other ones. But like I think Book and all of those like weird little like tricks that you would normally do to beat skill drain, from over the years is like, well,
Well,
in
well,
engine I
Book of
can
Moon
do
also. I
this.
mean, I don't know if that's a good like
No, 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 no. Well, like it's
analogy
not a
because like
reason for like drain to exist, but I'm saying like in general
I'm
is
saying
like,
like right like Book. The only reason Book of Moon is even played right now is because of one deck. So like
oh
if
no, no,
that
no,
one
no,
deck doesn't
for sure, no.
exist,
But like just in general, it's like you might have an in-engine way to deal with drain, which is like, let's look at something like Cash, where it's like Shangri Ira plus like the field spell, right? Like all of those weird little niche things that deal with drain, but then cards
Mhm.
like Gozen and Rivalry just like restrict you from doing anything. Drain
Yeah.
still lets, like you said, like just summon guys, and sometimes you can just attack and like your opponent will die. But yeah, like goes in rivalry, like Tikaboo, those cards just ignore the basic fundamentals of like, I can have an effect that deals with this, and then I can chain a card to take it off the field, like just a very basic interaction to beat a card like skill drain, that you can't use to beat Gozen, because you just can't even summon the card that outs either of those cards, right? Like Iblee level of like you can't play, which is
Mhm.
kind of unfortunate. That's not to say like, so like, again, my justification before was, we've had Gozen rivalry exist and like be bad and then like fall out of favor and then be good again. And like when those sort of yo-yos happen, I think it's same with like anti-spell. It's like those cards probably shouldn't exist because of that reason alone, and then
Yes.
it's silly. But I've never looked at Drain and been like, I wish Drain didn't exist in the format. I'm always fine with Drain existing. I don't know why. I like when my opponent flips that card against me, and I like flipping that card because I feel like it's just one of those really polarizing ones where people don't know what to do when it happens. But
Hmm.
I'm still of the thought of like, I'm summoning cards against like a trap deck and then activating a card. Like I'm activating an effect even though I know Drain is up in case my opponent is silly and activates like bottomless trap hole. You know what I mean? Just so like little things ingrained in my head
Yeah.
from like playing against Drain from the last 15, 20 years, right?
That's funny because we talked about that at WCQ where like when I will summon a monster and activate the effect, and my opponent will go, "I have skill drain face up," and I go,
And you just
"Yes,"
go, yes, I
and
know.
yeah,
Yeah.
you like every time, like
uh,
without fail, that happens.
it's so funny, and you're just like, it's just like, yeah, you know what I mean? It's like when my opponent doesn't, I go, okay. But then, like, obviously, if they start to resolve their effect, I'm like, whoa, 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 hold up, buddy. It's just like, no, you
Right.
can activate it. I don't care. Like, go for it. I love those.
So then, are you guys also of the opinion that Labyrinth's more problematic towards floodgates than the Labyrinth cards themselves, or do you think that some of the Labyrinth engine should probably get hit?
Lovely is an issue, but I'm not sure how you approach that,
Which one
right?
is that? The one that just I don't
Well,
remember which one Lovely is.
Lovely is the hand rip
Oh
one.
yeah,
So when you
that
Lovely
play
is
the
the one,
combo
yeah.
deck, it's like
yeah,
very
that one
silly.
is
Yeah,
that
but
one is
I
when that one resolves. That's the only one I actually feel like is like kind of but yeah, like
well,
what
it's
like
it's
ban
just
that. What
such a
does that
big
do?
like tempo swing. I
Hmm.
think Lovely also just like has to, so that's the funny thing, right? When a card functions like Lovely in the same respect to like the floodgates, where it's like actually maybe not in the same respect, but if you draw Lovely, it is terrible, right?
Yeah.
When you don't draw Lovely and you draw every other card, your deck is insane. And I think cards like that become an issue, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't want to draw some of these cards. Like, why should they all be good? And that's where it gets kind of weird. But maybe you have to hit Big Welcome as like a consistency hit, but then like Lab already has enough issues for consistency between like Ash and like Bell. Like when Lab becomes prominent in the format, you just see more cards like that. So I don't know. Maybe you just keep Lovely, and then you just have to look at cards like Erad and all the other silly stuff. Because like Lovely ripping two is fine. Like other decks do that. You know what I mean? Like Dragons summon Levy. It's like I'm not screaming for Levy to get hit. You know, you hand trap them, you get levied. You start with four cards. You get Lovely turn one in the clock combo, and then you like flip another trap and hit another card. Like that's whatever. You know that can happen. All these decks can rip one or two cards. Maybe we let Labyrinth have their day and keep Lovely.
All right, this is
I
gonna
think Erad
be
definitely has to go.
an
Or-
unhinged take, but hear me out. So I think one of the reasons why some of these floodgates can seem more oppressive, and like the people who say floodgates are fine, and they say stuff like like just like if you're afraid of floodgates, like just play Cosmic Cyclone, or just play like whatever,
Mm.
and it's like all these cards that beat floodgates are terrible because they don't. I mean, okay, Cosmic's not terrible, but you know what I mean. Like they're not like feasible always to be playing, or you can't play enough copies of them to consistently beat the floodgates because they don't do anything against the other things.
Yeah, yeah.
Right,
No,
I
I agree
it's a
with that.
Mystic Mind problem.
Yeah.
Like when you're playing Mystic Mind in a format where every the best deck is not weak to the cards that the Mystic that are good against Mystic Mind. So if you play like these cards that are good against the floodgates that are not good against the other like 90% of the field, you just have dead cards in your deck and you make your deck that much worse.
Mm.
Yeah. I
Well, it's
I
also
think hold on, let me finish my thought before you go
yes,
on.
yes, yes,
I
yes,
think,
and
and this is the unhinged take part. I actually think if Pankratops went to 3, I legitimately think we'd see these floodgate decks evaporate. Like just if you can just
I
have a
don't
card in your side
know.
deck that you can
Yeah,
actually put in against everything, and every single person just has multiple Pankratops. I mean, like you're still going to side Cosmic, and then you'll also have something like Pankratops in your side deck because it's not only good against back row decks, it's also good against the monster decks, and you'll just
Hmm.
have this like utility answer because it's just like I guess what I mean is you won't see these floodgate decks. I don't think you'll see them going deep in tournaments anymore because now it's like half of the time you win with these floodgate decks are not only because your opponent doesn't draw the out to them, it's your opponent doesn't play the out to them, you know?
mm.
And now it'll just be okay, how many times in 11 rounds can you dodge your opponent not playing Pankratops or Cosmic and not drawing it? And I truly just think like you're gonna have to start building your deck in a pretty fundamentally different manner when the entire room's tools to beat you get better. And I also just don't think Pankratops is a problem anyway, really. I think that card is pretty acceptable. to begin
So
with.
it's funny because I thought about that before, where I was like, I wonder if this card can like come back to 3 because I think that card is. I really am a big fan of that card.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think about times where in recent history, there's been a couple tournaments where I've had that card summoned on me, not playing a deck that is like a floodgate based deck, and I shit my pants. I'm like, holy shit, this card destroys me
Well, it's
right
because it's
now.
at 1 and you're not thinking about it because it's a card
Even,
that's limited and they summon it and you're like, "Oh, that card exists in the game." It's like when
yeah.
every single person has it, you will think
Mm.
about it. And then, and it becomes more relevant. And it's like that's the problem with these
So
types of cards with
the thing
limited
is that
also.
I'm trying to think if that actually matters to where like how would you build your field different to play around this card that deals with monsters and spells and traps and have it not be problematic? And think it would be hard to do that. I think it puts you in a situation to where like most decks can't do that, and then Pankratops becomes like an issue again. I'm not entirely sure. I'm on the fence where like I don't know if this could be an issue,
Sure.
but I can imagine a world where it is, especially in formats where like if there's like decks with like negates, that's fine. But once it comes with like decks just like putting up like maybe like 2 monsters and like a spell and trap, I think it becomes like semi problematic then, where it goes like attack, do you clear a guy, pop the back row, or force like some other interaction, and then like your opponent invested their hand into like this field and 1 card dealt with 2 cards automatically, and then it's like, well, shit. Um,
I don't think a tool
I
for
don't know.
going second is inherently that unbalanced though. Like I think Bankratops is a more balanced card than Lightning Storm, to be honest, in terms
Oh,
of like what it does against these
I thought you were
decks.
going to say a card I was going to have a problem with, and that
Oh,
was tactics.
oh, tactics is whatever. I think Pank is like for for these trap decks even. I feel like they'd probably rather you summon Pank than activate Lightning Storm most of the time,
I 100% would.
but I think
100,
Lightning Storm
definitely.
is a card that is like that's a very polarizing card, and that's a whole other thing that
That's a card I hate.
whatever.
That card is never like that's a card that like never works for me.
Yeah,
Like, I don't know,
but
but
that's just
yeah.
something that unhinged Pankratops take. I mean, I don't think saying Pankratops probably could come back is not that's not like the craziest take, but I maybe saying that Pankratops coming back would make floodgates bad is a ridiculous take until you really think about it, right? And how just every single person in the whole rooms
Mhm.
probably would play, especially if it like just goes like the format after it goes back to 2 or 3. Everyone in the room's gonna have that in their side deck. The
Yeah.
first event
And
Pankratops at
so
3, every single person in the room would have it in their side deck.
then I don't know. I'm going to use the word issue
Uh huh.
here,
Mm-hmm.
where these decks that do use floodgates do what they're doing now, and they just use like triple solemn strike also.
I mean that's just still trading. Like they can do that
Yeah,
already, right? Like,
right, but now it becomes like more commonplace. I'm saying that's how they would probably respond. That's how I would respond if I use a floodgate deck in a format where Pankratops is at
yeah, and
3.
then you're
Like
getting a
if I'm
lightning storm because you're setting strike, right? Like that's the like I don't know. Then
maybe, yeah.
eh,
If you still use 3 Pankratops and then 2 lightning storms
yeah.
in your side deck.
Or Feather Dusted, or even just Cosmic on the Floodgate because you're setting a
Yeah.
monster negate now instead of a spell trap negate because currently, and that's the problem, right? And that's where also stuff like Eradicator, where it gets really really polarizing, is when a card like Fenrir is not particularly good at clearing floodgates through back row because it is an incredibly slow effect, right? It's attached to the battle
Yes.
phase or attached to monster effects activating, and then a card like Pankratops is limited. um, the only real avenue for removal for these back row decks is spells. It's Lightning Storm, it's Cosmic Cyclone, it's Harvest Feather Duster, right? And then evenly matched. That's a whole, that's a whole other thing that I'll get to. So when all of the removal is funneled into spells, that's where we see Eradicator come into the fray, and that's when Eradicator becomes problematic. And then here's my new unhinged tank. If Pankratops is at 3, is Eradicator even the best thing to be putting in your deck anymore when now the out to your floodgate is no longer a spell? and they'll Eradicator you for 2, and then Pankratops clears their floodgate, and then your one monster that just FTKs them goes through. Like, I know that's obviously a much more narrow situation, but I don't know. I didn't really intend for this to turn into just like the pro Pankratops like propaganda. Like I didn't think my argument for this would like evolve this much, but
I
but
can't believe our title of this is going to be the Pankratops podcast,
the Pankratops propaganda podcast. Yes, of course. But
the PPP.
the PPP, of course. Yeah, that's just like it doesn't seem. I don't think it's that far fetched. Or they need to print a card in a similar role to Pankratops, but
Okay, I
slightly
was about to
less,
say the
slightly less
thing. Like,
powerful.
if your opponent controls like more spell and traps, then you can spell some of this card from your hand, and then like you can like tribute it, destroy a spell or trap or something like that.
And then it maybe
But
does
like,
something.
not,
Yeah.
but not a monster. Like it
Yeah.
like
It needs, yeah,
So-
because like I'm thinking about other monsters. I'm thinking about monsters that deal with spells and traps, and this is where my thought process went. Okay, I thought to myself, Breaker the Magical Warrior is too
yeah.
slow, and then I thought to myself, um, Lila is too slow, and then I thought Denko doesn't deal with
Like face up stuff.
face ups, yeah. And then I started thinking, if Spiral Super Agent didn't have to guess the top card, that would probably be the one, right? Would a Spiral Super Agent that doesn't have to guess correctly and be like a less desirable level than level 4, would that be an unreasonable card to print?
It doesn't really answer Drain if you're sort of getting to the layers with it, but yeah, sure.
Like, maybe.
Probably.
So I don't know. Maybe that's
get what
everything I
you
want to see.
mean.
I
Well,
want to see
you want a
monster-based
card
back
that
row
does
removal.
like
Maybe,
you want
right?
a card that does multiple things, right?
Yeah.
Like you want it to be like when it's not destroying a back row, it's at least achieving something in my strategy.
Yes.
Right? Like that's the
Yes.
biggest thing. Yeah. But I don't know how you do that without like I think Panthera is like probably close enough to what you want.
That is very
in
close.
terms of-
Yes, that is
yeah,
extremely close. Yeah.
I think that's like probably the extent you can get to without making it too ridiculous. But
It
then
having
we
to
don't
reveal an Earth
answer
and a
stuff.
Fire is a
Yeah.
bit of a restriction, of course. But like,
Yeah,
I don't think
I'm
it's
trying to think of like
unreasonable.
how you would build it, like to sort of offset that.
Like,
Hmm.
if there's a
like
deck,
designing a card, because I think you want a card that also like maybe it's a card that like functions in hand that outs cards like Goes and Rivalry. But I'm trying to think of like how to do it without being like too ridiculous.
Yeah, because all the ones that do it, like Trap Eater, isn't good because if they don't have a floodgate, it does nothing, right? And that's where.
Well,
where
it's
that
also the
card
fact
falls.
that sometimes you can't like
You can't summon it
because
at all.
like traditionally they'll just like they'll just put the flood against you anyway. Maybe it's like in engine sort of looking at a card like Sturve. So maybe more cards like Sturve or like Chandragula that just like obviously those are just the first things that come to mind because we were talking about the WCQ. But cards that do multiple things, but like sort of in vein of like other games where if you draw a card and it's unplayable, you can at least use it to pay for the cost of something else. So let's look at like maybe an archetype where you're discarding the card to pop a spell or trap or to pop a monster. So like let's say it's like dangers, right? But let's say like this archetype will do one thing. It could just be like grossly generic, but then the other effect is discard this card and another card, destroy card your opponent controls
like
or something.
Blaster.
Yes, Blast a bit more generic, but maybe we can not make it generic and just make it like this card is a like obviously it can be level 2, 4, 7, whatever, and then just like have an irrelevant effect, but it functions as like a card that you can do something with, you can link with it, you can synchro with it, whatever. It could be an extend, it could be something, but then its additional effect is this card plus another card turns into MST. This card plus another card turns into Soul Taker or something. Like just very very like specific quick effect where it's like this is a 2-for-1 in your opponent's favor, but it adds the problem that you have,
Yeah,
and like
if they
very
just
tough to interact with.
if decks just provide a slight, yeah, that is something interesting. I mean, and that's so. I think the problem with your thinking maybe is that when you just start, like making every archetype have effects that generically, then like what distinguishes
Yeah,
them. But
yeah.
but
Well,
I
like them
do
we're just to
agree.
gauge a level, but I think this is like if we make it a little more specific, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like this is just going to be removal outside of its archetype, and then obviously like additional benefits like in its archetype or something. Like that would
Hmm.
be something to consider.
Yeah, where
So
it's an interesting design space to consider, like giving cards, because like right now every card would be good has to have 19 effects, right? But it's something that you can make an effect strong but inefficient isn't really
Mm.
something that I think they've been doing, right? Like if you make a Stratos-esque monster and then it has a second effect in the hand that's like a neg 1 but it removes the floodgate, like that, like you wouldn't really use that effect often, but if you did,
Mm.
you'd be very happy it's there, right? And it just kind of
Yeah, yeah.
prevents these games where like it prevents like the non games, right? It prevents where like, oh, I can literally play 0 cards in my hand because my opponent has played 1 card. So that is an interesting design space to consider, and like that is the reason why, like some of like I feel like that's how the best decks often are the best decks, because they have these utility type effects. Like if Blaster didn't do what it did, Dragons would have been significantly worse. If they had like
Mm.
literally no outs to these floodgates, Dragons would have been a much, much, much worse deck. But just the fact that they did, in 2013, they were much better. Like one of the reasons Spiral I think was also so good is because other than skill drain, literally no floodgates hit it, because Tough and Agent just destroyed every card your opponent controlled every single turn. And they're just so generic, and it just worked out enough at the time that you couldn't get floodgated literally specifically other than skill drain, which was limited at the time.
Mm.
And I'm sure there are other decks if I thought about it more. Where like Burning Abyss has very like resilient cards, and they could in engine support incredibly generic cards like Wing Blast or Geki Break or whatever, and you just really couldn't get floodgated because you had all these cards that just eliminated all of these cards that would make the game not happen essentially. And that kind of has been a hallmark of some of these best decks. And like yes, like Fenrir is really good at clearing most of these cards. Obviously not all on its own, but like a deck having access to something like Fenrir just inherently gives it a lot more options against these types of cards, where like Kashtira cannot lose to a singular floodgate only, right? Because Fenrir
Mm.
exists. Like it has to lose to, and like Planet exists and they give you removal. Tyr had access to Planet and all these ways to trigger it even under floodgates that would then pop a card. So we really have, Sprite Smashers, all these decks have had these incredibly flexible generic options. Sprite Smashers is probably the best example of like an inefficient but powerful effect, where you are 2-for-1ing in your opponent's favor, but you're having, non-targeting banishing is one of the strongest pieces of removal you could possibly have. So
all right, I'm
kind of
going to
evens
jump
out.
in here
Sure.
finally. So you guys are touching on something I have thought about for a very long time in regards to adding like less efficient effects to cards to make them more like versatile.
Hmm.
And originally when I thought about this and wanting to develop cards or hoping Kami would make cards this way, was for trap cards. And I think because with trap cards, if they're not floodgate related, a lot of times they end up being very bad. And one of the ways I thought Konami should start developing trap cards is by rewarding you for using those trap cards. And so like and then making them in a similar vein to infinite impermanence. So like with infinite
Mm.
impermanence, you're able to activate that card from your hand if you control no cards. And if they started making trap cards similar to that, but saying like you can activate this trap from your hand by revealing a different trap card from your hand or discarding another trap card from your hand. And I think it would be instead of going so taking that idea of rewarding you for playing more traps, but also making them able to be activated in ways that are more efficient, instead of just like letting your opponent play all their cards and you have a hand of trap cards you can't use. Um, if you take that idea and instead of applying it to monsters, you apply it to trap cards, I think you could also do the similar thing. So that way, if you're playing into a format where um, you want a card that is efficient against more than one deck, but you want it to be able to have like some sort of limitation. You could just print better trap cards that have the effect of like, let's say, like if your opponent controls more spell and traps than you do, you can activate this card from your hand by discarding a card. Target one card in the field and destroy it, right? And that way, you don't have to print that kind of thing on a monster and have it be end up like worrying about it whether being searchable or too powerful because it's printed on a monster card and then but you still have that kind of answer you're looking for where it's like it deals with spells and traps that can make a format unhealthy but also isn't dead against monsters. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think if you look at the trap decks that have been played recently, um, they've tried multiple different ways, kind of how you mentioned that, it's like just traps, like inherently are like not good. And you need to, like give them some sort of like reward. Where like the three trap decks that I maybe the only three decks that I truly think are like trap decks that have been good in the last couple years have been Altergeist, Eldritch, and Labyrinth. And the
Hmm.
way they approached it were very, very, very different. Altergeist, the actual archetype, was actually just broken monster effects and like two Altergeist traps, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then so like barely even a trap deck. It just had a crazy, crazy payoff card in Multifaker for playing traps. So it
If
was
you activate a
barely a
trap
trap
card,
deck.
here's this broken thing,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Eldritch, all the traps float, right? All of the traps after you
They
and
consistently
and
replace
they're
themselves.
monsters, right? So
Yes,
they
they are also
actually
monsters,
yeah,
yeah.
so they're yes. Like Eldritch is probably like where trap guard design naturally had to go in that it's traps that have attack points and float, right? And it's like but they're weaker than regular traps, right? Like Conk, like pop a card, is not a particularly strong trap card.
Pop a card with a condition.
Yeah, yeah, so it's just that when it's attached to this floating, obviously it gets a lot better. And then Labyrinth, what they kind of tried to do, and I'm not even sure how much they succeeded in this, is their gimmick is kind of flipping the convention of trap cards on its head, and you can, with conditions, obviously, activate trap cards the turn they're set, and set trap cards from your, set trap cards when your opponent goes first, so you can flip them on your first turn. Because the problem with trap decks,
Mhm.
similarly to stuff like, like Geargia, is like you're playing a trap deck and you go second, well, your turn one is not doing anything. Your turn one is setting all your traps, right?
Right.
So the fact that you can set traps on your opponent's turn and then play them on your turn means you are actually playing on your first turn. So I think that was an extremely interesting way of doing it. The problem, obviously, is when you get stuff like setting traps directly from your deck and then flipping them immediately, a la Lady Cuckoo Clock Eradicator, is when you see that becoming problematic. But as a
Mhm.
concept, I like the idea they went for. Um, but yeah, I feel like your idea is probably the next logical step for a way to try to make a trap deck appealing, right? Is just like traps that have sort of imperm-esque qualities. And the problem, I think, with the only two cards they really made like imperm are imperm and evenly matched. And I'll argue evenly matched isn't even a trap card. Evenly matched is just a spell. Like that card is literally just a spell card.
Yes.
Like
You were never yeah.
like you cannot use that as a trap, right? Like just based on its design. So that is something I don't really like about the design of evenly matched. It essentially is just a spell. So what's even the point? But yeah, if they do make traps that have like different modes and um and then the other one maybe is like more breakthrough skill esque cards. That's a card that I think its design is very, very cool. Um, where it has, you essentially get to use it again, but only on your own turn. So I'm not, like I think if Breakthrough Seal could be banished from the graveyard on your opponent's turn, it would be a absolutely
That card would be
mind-bendingly
nuts.
broken card, right?
Yes.
But
So I think they
um,
could yeah, again, like, do things like that where it's like, banish this card from your graveyard and, like, banish a card from your hand, and then you can, like,
Yeah.
apply this effect, right?
yeah,
Like cards like that were like,
that
yeah,
have
like
that have costs associated with them, but it gives like because the problem with traps, right, is they're extremely poor tempo, but usually the value is pretty good. So if you just if you make them less efficient but higher tempo, it kind of brings them in line with other cards, more or less. But yeah, I think that's we started this conversation on Labyrinth, and this is where we ended up. I ended up talking about I ended up talking about Pankratops for 8 minutes, and then we're talking about philosophy of trap design. Okay, so the
I'm gonna
last
be honest, I definitely didn't think this is the way this
yeah,
podcast would
me
go.
either.
So
So I think the last deck I want to talk about in terms of like, do we need to hit this or not? Is like, do we need to do anything to Branded? Does that deck
yeah,
just suck? Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't
No,
I don't know.
I think that deck doesn't need to exist. Like it's actually just meta. But I also I had this discussion as well. Like some of the Europeans took it to Euros and like they all did like fine, you know, relative to how Branded performed in other regions. But it was a lot of like, yeah, half actually more than half of my opponents will activate Branded Fusion, put the Fear of God in me, and then just end on like the most abysmal end board I've ever seen. And
hmm
then like you know, I'll like be in like a Discord call and Nash will be like, you know, brothers, like I have a new Branded combo, and it's like him resolving Branded Fusion, and like it just takes your entire soul, you know. And like that's where I think Branded is at, where it's like this deck is so difficult to play correctly, beat Ash, and then that's before you factor in like D barrier as well, and then just like also tackle the issue of
And
like
anti-spawn
drawing.
eradicator. Right.
Well, yeah, but also just like drawing bad because your deck is just all engine, right? Like it's just all cards that only function to like make your deck playable.
Yeah.
You're not drawing these like nice overlapping like hands of like I drew a Fenrir and now I can play. It's like, well, no, like you have to draw a Branded Fusion, and if that cold resolves, sure, but you still have to have these other pairings in case like something happens like versus your Branded
like
Fusion
fusion
resolving.
deployments and stuff like that.
Yeah. And like the cards that they put in to sort of like offset it aren't like particularly amazing either, and you like have more potential to like brick your hand and whatever else. But yeah, like I think Branded is just a deck that hasn't truly been understood in terms of like maybe skill gap. It would like it can do so much. The deck building process for it is really difficult, but it does something silly. So maybe you're just meant to tackle the something silly part of it, which is obviously like the gimmick puppet. And like, how do we do that now? They got rid of expulsion. We should maybe get rid of sanctifier. But maybe that's like a down the line sort of thing because
I mean, I
Konami's
think
not
I
gonna
think
look
you
at it
just
and
get
be
rid
like,
of the gimmick puppet.
you can still give them other cards, but obviously those ones are a
Yes,
little
so
bit more
like,
manageable. Yeah,
but
I know what you mean.
but also not
Puppets
even
are
just
just
more manageable. Is that like gimmick puppet is like searchable in the deck via
yeah.
like their
Well,
own
no,
cards, whereas the other ones are not.
Is
no, the
Ito
other ones can.
searchable? Is Ito or is he a light?
Can't the other ones just get dumped
Ra's
by
disciple
Dragonol,
you can't
Branded
send
Fusion anyway?
off Granule, so that's
Grant,
relevant. But I
right?
don't know if what is that card called? Ito? Edo?
Ito the magical,
Ito the
the
magical
magical.
magical force.
He's a
Oh,
level six
Ido. It
dark
is level
mage.
6 star, so you can still send this with Granule,
Mm.
which is unfortunate.
Uh,
So, but yeah, I agree. Like stuff like Ra's disciple isn't nearly as accessible, and it's like specifically the level 6 or higher guys that you can send are like
Well, it
maybe the more
also beating
problematic.
like Book of Moons and droplets and stuff
Yeah, I
like
mean,
that
obviously
coming
the
in,
gimmick puppet
right?
one is the
Yeah.
best one because it's or else we'd see people try other ones, but they don't. The gimmick puppet's just the only good one. So
yeah.
if they
I
just
just think in concept it's like you probably don't need a card like Sanctifier to exist if you
No,
think it shouldn't
I
exist.
agree.
But
I think short term you just take out gimmick puppet, and long term you hit sanctifier.
yeah, I
yeah.
can get behind that actually. But the and I think it's funny like if you look at how Japan has addressed it, it's like it's very funny. Okay, I'm gonna read off the cards that are hidden branded. They're very funny. So branded fusion to 1, branded opening to 1, bestial baldric to 1, bestial drewsworm to 1, bestial magnamut to 1, bestial lubellion to 1, I'm sure there are more, unless those cards actually. I thought there was one more branded card that got limited, but maybe they actually put that one back. That might be the extent of it. Hold on, let me see if there's any cards at 2 anymore. No, I guess it's those. It's just all those cards, right? I thought for some reason Aluber might not be at 3, but it appears to be. Yeah. So they've hit a bunch of stuff from branded, and we've currently hit 0, right? Like, I mean, branded expulsion, but other than that, we've actually hit 0 other cards, right? Like, there have been no consistency hits to branded at all in the TCG, or to Bistrels or anything. Any engines they would play. Am I missing something? Yeah, I think it's just
I'm not
branded
gonna lie.
expulsion.
I zoned out and Jeff just muted himself. Repeat that, and I'll give you an answer. Hold on.
I said has anything been hit for branded other than branded expulsion in the TCG? And I think the answer is just no, right? Like no consistency hits
No.
at all. Like not even
No.
a weird,
Yeah.
not even like a weird
Everything else
generic
is
card.
still completely like functional.
Yeah.
Yeah, like nothing. Yeah,
And it's
nothing
been doing
like
worse. I think it's crazy. The more support this deck seems to get, the worse it seems to do. And I feel like, could it actually be like what you're like, you alluded to the skill gap being higher for it, but could it just be that like people who don't really know how to play their decks, they look at these new cards and they add 5 more new support cards and just resolve a branded fusion, and their brain makes the AOL 5.0 dial-up noise, and like they just don't even know what to do with what they have. They're like, well, Quem, and they look at Quem and they're like, ugh. And they just nothing happens, like somehow. When back when they first came out, like branded fusion, send tragedy, search a Luber, make Mirror Jade, summon a Luber, get Brandon in red, go, like beats every deck, right? But like now they just try to do 19,000 different things and then just end up losing somehow. And I don't know. I feel like maybe there's just some disconnect there of
I
like what
mean,
you're actually supposed to be doing. But
I think it's also just the fact that every single format, like if branded ever becomes good, it can't be good.
sure, because it's can be
There,
targeted by so many cards. Yeah,
like besides Ash Blossom being the most popular card in the game, period, not even close.
yeah.
You
That's
also
only
have
not been
things like
true literally one time since it was printed. In the 6
yes,
7 years Ash has been legal, there has only been one format where it was not the most played card.
Mm-hmm.
So
um,
yeah,
so you have that, and then like like the anti spell continuously like popular card even till right now, and branded is very rarely played. Like it's played, but I didn't play against any at the event. Max didn't play against any at the event.
I didn't play against
Um,
any. Blake played against one.
and like but anti spell is still a played card because spell cards are so freaking good,
Yeah.
and as long as like these cards exist that inherently and like unintentionally hit the deck, I just don't think that.
All right, hear me out.
Uh,
Branded with 3 Pankratops. Best deck? Is that why Pankratops is limited?
yeah,
All right.
yeah, that is why it's
All right, that's the conclusion that we came to over an hour. Pankratops can't go to 3 because then Brandon will be able to beat anti-spell. All right.
uh,
But yeah, I definitely agree with everything you just said. It's just like, yeah, it's definitely the deck. And as Bowden mentioned, like your deck is like 34 engine cards, right? Like
yeah,
you
yeah, and
can't.
then like to try and play these cards that beat the cards that beat you makes your deck more inefficient, and then your deck is not as good, and then you lose because you drew like just poor hands, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because you do have to play so many cards that are just fusion material, right? So, I mean, Albaz is the main one. That card is like, I mean, that card is not
It's not no, it's not like an
unplayable, but
unplayable
it's
card,
not
yeah.
good. If I put it normal summons Albaz and declares its effect, I'm usually pretty happy with what's happening comparatively, to be honest. All right. So Master Duel, they actually made an in-game announcement for this. So if you just open Master Duel, you can just see the format for Worlds. There is a shared card pool between your team. So for those of you who aren't aware, the Master Duel qualifications are the person that qualified for Master Duel could select 2 teammates from their region, from anybody who essentially played Master Duel during the Worlds event. And that is their team for the World Championship. And what they determined, probably in an effort to maintain deck diversity, so it's not just 19 mirror matches of the same best deck, the team may not have any overlapping, with some exceptions, the team may not have overlapping cards between their decks. So as a team, you create 6 decks total. A team of three players creates 6 decks total. So if you put Tear-Element Sheeran in, in deck A, you cannot put Tear-Element Sheeran in any of your other decks. And then you also have to follow the Forbidden List. So you get 2 copies of Sheeran total between all of the decks in Master Duel, etc. The exception is you may pick 3 cards, and those 3 cards do not follow this rule, which unfortunately means almost I guarantee every team will pick Maxine Ash, right? So every single deck will have Maxine Ash, and then the 3rd card is like up in the air. Call by the Grave, maybe.
I think it's probably Call by the Grave, but I can't think of like another card that is like it's it's probably Call by the Grave.
Yeah, but that card is at 2 in Master Duel, so maybe you want to pick a card that's at 3 to get the most value out of your.
I don't know what card that would be, since I don't play a lot of Master Duel, but yeah.
What if somebody is just a sicko and picks like There Can Be Only One and goes and match in Rivalry as their 3 and just puts all of those in every
Person
deck?
in Rivalry are at 1.
Oh, yes. Never mind.
Yeah.
Unlucky.
I don't want to sell. I have to keep my mouth shut. I don't want to self-report. But you will see. You'll be fine. For people that don't know, I am playing Master Duel Worlds with the first place European representative Costas and Herman Hansen. Yeah.
So I think that'll be interesting. I think it's a cool way to promote diversity. It's what we've seen in like a lot of other sort of online card games that have these types of big tournaments where they'll make you bring multiple decks. Even Duel Links makes you bring multiple decks. I don't know exactly what the rule for Duel Links and deck overlap is. But yeah, it is interesting to see them kind of do that. And if it's successful, I wonder if they'll ever do like an actual like TCG tournament with rules similar to this.
So that was what I was going to bring up, because that is my hope, that when they do another 3v3 in the US, they bring this rule over without without the whole like, pick 3 cards. Like I think that's less relevant
to that though anyway. But
do you?
Yeah, I think so.
I don't. I think it makes it way less interesting.
Maybe. I just think if everyone's playing 3 different decks, letting everybody play Cosmic isn't the end of the world. Like letting everyone play like a side deck card to not get flood, because then it's just like what happens when like the guy that only has Twister is playing against the guy that has the Floodgate deck. It's just like that.
Well, I mean, you can use like Cosmic, and then like in most Floodgate decks, Mystical Space Typhoon is basically the same thing, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, but I'm saying that's only 2. Then the 3rd guy's got to use Twister.
Or Twin Twister?
Or that too. I forgot the card existed.
I can't believe Ryan like went to Twister instead of MST.
Yeah.
Literally all the other functional cards.
Yeah, maybe. But yeah,
or like Lightning Storm or whatever.
I mean, that card's at 2, so you can only have 2 on your whole team.
Hey, I mean, one guy can use MST, one can use Cosmic, the other one can use two Lightning
Storms and a Harvest Feather Duster. Yeah, but yeah, maybe not. But I don't think that would be the end of the. I think the one where it gets relevant is just like, oh well, now we can't use multiple decks that like want prosperity or want whatever. Like, I know this is like a really really narrow one, but it's like you can't use 2 decks that want Tenki or 2 decks that want Rhoda. It's like I know that's way narrower. That's less relevant, but. Not that you would ever pick Tenki as the one. So what am I even saying? Prosperity you might pick as a shared card, but you definitely wouldn't pick something stupid like Tenki. Hopefully, unless I don't know what would have to happen. Unless the format is like 2014 and one person's playing a Bujin and one person's playing Fire Fist. Then like maybe. But
Yeah, I think the more I think about it, the more it's probably okay. Okay, so I think actually now I'm going to take back what I said and say it's probably actually better in the TCG format than it is the OCG because I think there's way more cards that are up for debate to be picked upon to be shared than in OCG.
Right. That
OCG, it's
was
like, oh, everyone picks this that way, and all the games are going to be like the same that way. Whereas now, I think maybe it would be like things that are like less problematic compared to Maxi. And my thought was like, oh, now like everyone can share like Dark Ruler no more, so like you don't get fucked by combo decks or something like
yeah.
that, right?
Yeah, like I definitely think a skill is identifying the 3 cards that are the most beneficial. And yes, there will be some people that won't pick Maxi Ash for Master Duel, probably. But I feel like almost every team will just pick Maxi Ash. Sorry, 1 second.
Or at least Maxi, like if your deck is yeah.
Yeah, but in the TCG, I agree. I think there's significantly more diversity of like, even if every single team picks Ash, like, I think that's less toxic than the other ones. But yeah, I agree. I think it'd be a cool rule if they did it. The other one I was thinking of is I mentioned this a while ago, but there was a side event at a My Hero event I went to where instead of a side deck, you had a second main deck, and if you
Okay.
won game 1, like, so both players bring a deck, the winner, that deck gets retired and they have to switch to their other deck, and then you have to win, and it's still a best 2 out of 3, but you have to win with both decks.
Okay.
And I think that was a cool format, and like that's something that like they could do a side event with that for Yu-Gi-Oh too, and that would be kind of fun, where like I won with Kashtira, and then now like I have to win with my Runic deck,
Sure.
and then the other person plays their same deck, and then if they win, then game 3 is Runic versus whatever their second deck was. But I do think like that type of format is kind of cool, where you build 2 entirely different decks instead of just having a side deck. But I don't think that could be like sustained for like a huge tournament, because obviously the barriers to entry of having 2 complete decks is very different. But yeah, I don't really have any other thoughts on the Master Duel announcement. I think it's kind of cool. I think it'll be fun to watch. I'm more excited to watch it now because I think it'll be interesting to see like what what is the 6th best deck in Master Duel, right? Like, let's see.
Right, yeah, like picking like 6 decks is like that cannot share cards is like kind of crazy because I thought Master Duel was kind of just ruled by like 2 decks right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
like one, but yeah.
is it just one? Or is it just tier limit?
Yeah, could just
Okay.
be. They say it's 2 deck on the metagame report, but I think it's just people just get bored of tier. I think tier is just like the definitive best deck, especially for
Okay.
like best of fun. But
Yeah, I mean, I would assume so. So,
But yeah, I think that covers that pretty much. Yeah, I don't have any other real thoughts on it. So, last thing I guess I want to touch on is they did just have a Duelist Nexus announcement, and what you predicted either 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 or 4 ago, like when they first announced all of these sets were going to have 25 quarter century secret rares, you said it'll probably be all the secrets and ultras because that's 24 cards. And that is what they did. So they announced for Duelist Nexus, all ultras and all secrets will be quarter century. And then this is the announcement
worst
I
news.
don't like.
Yes.
Yeah, is what's the 25th quarter century rare? Well, surely it would just be, like an upgrade like it has been in the past, like Bell or Mirror Jade or whatever it was from this. What even was it in Syac? I don't even remember. Oh, was it Visa Starfrost?
Yeah.
Whatever it was, surely it'll just be an upgrade. And then I thought about that more, and I was like, well, that would be kind of dumb because they're doing the rarity collection, they're doing all these sets, and we're getting a ton of upgrades of quarter century secret rare. So whatever card would be in the core set one would just not really be exciting because it'd just look the same as the other ones. Unfortunately, what they did is they made a 10,000 dragon-esque card.
Magicians of Bonds and Unity.
Yes, which isn't terrible that they would make a
No,
card like that.
Yeah, it's a
The
cool looking card,
the
and
problem the problem that we have with it is it will be the quarter century rare for the next 4 sets. And I know what you're
yeah.
thinking. Why would they put the same card in 4 sets in a row? And don't worry, we're also thinking that. However, the explanation is it'll have a different colored background in each set, so you'll know
What
which
set
one
it
is
came from?
which, and so you
Yeah.
can make a complete set of 4 of them. And I don't know, that just
Yeah.
doesn't really like. I didn't even like 10,000 like it meant nothing to me, because like 10,000 Dragons not a card, like an iconic card or like a nostalgic. It's just a big dragon,
So I
And
I
this one
think
similarly, it's just like it's just a guy, like it's
right.
sort of Dark Magician-esque, but it's just a guy, and I don't
So,
really care.
yeah, so I
But
think the best part about new sets is opening up new cards to be excited about. And this is not that. When you open up this card, you might be excited for the first one, but if you open that card again, I'm not going to be excited about it. And at
yeah,
least with the import cards, they were like pretty strong or like tournament stay cards. So you could be like excited about that, right? Like a Ghost Spell or whatever,
yeah.
or like cards that were like, yeah, like you see a lot of play or are pretty strong. And this is just not the case. It's simply just a collector's card, and um, like even if you look at, let's see, I'm gonna go look 1 second at the sold listings for 10,000 Dragon real quick.
Those are what,
10,000.
like for the price or what?
Uh, so the last one that even sold for like a 10,000 Dragon was like over a month ago on TCG Player,
Yeah.
and I think it's like gonna be the same with this card where it's going to be like significantly less than 10,000 Dragon, but like after people get their one, that's kind of like that's it.
And they're
They
gonna have
don't need
4
another.
chances, right? So
Yeah.
if anything, if this becomes even close to as desirable as 10,000 Dragon, which I don't think it will be, but even if it does,
Definitely not as close.
I don't think we'll see that happen until the first set that doesn't have it even comes out. So maybe I think it'll be fine for Duelist Nexus. Then when Age of Overlord comes out and the next one comes out, I think all versions will tank. And
Hmm.
then I truly think they will be low until this first set that doesn't have it comes out. And now that, there definitively are not more of them and we know how many there are or whatever, then people will start wanting them. But I
Right.
think it'll be
Basically, when
funny to
like they
see
aren't
which
in
colors will be
circulation
more expensive
anymore.
too. I think there'll be like one color that'll be a lot more expensive and it will just be really funny.
Oh, absolutely. And it'll probably just be like the Yu-Gi-Oh colored rarities, where like usually like blue is like the most expensive version.
Yeah. And the green one is like cheaper. And it'll just be like, all
Yeah.
right, fine. But I don't know. It's not a terrible thought. I am not excited about the same card being in 4 different sets.
No,
I don't,
absolutely not.
yeah. So, but I don't have particularly strong, like I'm not like, oh, this is the worst thing ever, like I hate this, but it's just like it's just a little lame, But
It is. I think
it's
it's
just,
lame too.
yeah, it's just not as fun. I don't know. I think this will be kind of like the Battle of Chaos Dark Magician if we're to like price it out. Probably, I think that's what this will probably end up similarly. Which I think that card is undervalued at the moment, unless it run
It
up
is. It was
recently.
less than 100.
Yeah, I think that card's a little undervalued at the moment, but regardless, I think these will be of similar pedigree. Um, but yeah, so that is how the quarter centuries are going to work out, and I don't know. We'll see. I'm kind of like this announcement because now it makes me feel like the Vanquish Soul new guy will be quarter century rare. So I'm happy about that. Like that's the one because surely that card will just be Ultra and Age of Overlord. Surely, please.
It's a common in Japan, so
Well, right,
who
but
knows?
so are all the cards. So is every card ever. Um, I felt like they usually made these deck building set cards Starlight anyway. Like we looked at the Labyrinth ones and the Live Twin ones and the Exoso Sister ones. So I was hoping this one would be Starlight, but now or Quarter
Well,
Century. But I feel like now
we
it's
also get
almost
to look
guaranteed.
at what they did with Pearly. They made the Pearly monster a
Well,
common.
that's because they were gonna hit them, and then they hit them. I'm assuming that's the reason. But yes, that is crazy. That is crazy
You think
that
it's because
happened.
simply because they hit a memory to 1?
Maybe, probably.
Yeah.
That's probably why the Super Heavy Samurai cards were low rarity, right?
No comment.
Yeah. Sure. All right. I think that wraps it up, I guess. Next time, I don't even like. We can talk about Duelist Nexus because that actually comes out pretty soon. So
I'm
maybe in a week or
assuming that we're
two.
going, in like a week or 2, we're going to get like openings of it, and
Mhm.
I'm excited to see what the new TCG exclusive art type is
Yeah, the
because
crystals.
those are always the most exciting thing about me
Yeah,
about sets.
the Tostitos archetype or whatever they were. That's
Tostitos,
literally
yes.
the name.
Tostitos. Yeah.
Have you
The
read it? It's like Tostino or something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yes.
the lore is that there's like a crystal cave and it's like overtaking everything, but
It changes
your
around it.
your headcanon is the Tostitos.
Yeah, it turns everything into a chip.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's they're edible.
The crystal god Tostito.
Yeah.
It's fine. All right. So that's probably what we're talking about next. Is just we're gonna dive into Duelist Nexus, because all the WCQs are closed. The season's over. Now we just got Worlds, and then
Yeah,
will be a
new
new
Yu-Gi-Oh!
season,
Yeah.
a new year. Yes, a new year for Yu-Gi-Oh! Coming up. Yeah. Yes, the day after Worlds, we celebrate Yu-Gi-Oh! New Year's.
Yes, winter solstice, etc.
Of course. All right. Thank you guys for listening, and we will see you next time.
Adios.
Bye.